Welcome to Pathways to Parity, Investing in Economic Rights for All. My name is Shaman Walton, President of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and I represent District 10. I'm thrilled to be a part of opening this program as we spend the next 2 days advancing the work of securing new opportunities for a right and just economic framework. I do want to apologize for not being able to attend with you all in person over these next couple of days. But over the next couple of days, you will hear from subject matter experts, including scholars, community leaders, business innovators, and entrepreneurs, my fellow elected officials and political colleagues who are all working together to ensure a vibrant economic future. Thank you for your attendance. I do hope to be with you next time.
Good morning. Oh, this side of the room is like awake and vibrant. This side is still trying to figure it out. Good morning. I'm Cheryl Davis, the director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, and I just want to first and foremost welcome you all and thank you so much for being in space with us. Give yourselves a hand for getting downtown at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever time it is on a Thursday morning. My charge this morning is to share with you all the call to action and what we hope to accomplish over the course of the next couple of days. And I wanted to start with a quote from Dr. King that says, "There is nothing new about poverty. What is new, however, is that we have the resources to get rid of it," right? So much of what Dr. King was doing toward the end of his life was not celebrated when he was doing it. He was challenging the power structures. He was challenging the way that we were moving forward. He was thinking about equity in a way that now we name it, but that it wasn't named at that point in time, and that he really was launching this war on poverty. And so we have so many resources in San Francisco specifically. Between President Walton and Mayor Breed, there's been a tremendous allocation of resources, specifically for minority communities, but for the Black community through the Dreamkeeper Initiative, through Opportunities for All with paid internships, with just ongoing support and at least the calling out of the disparities. And so today, we really want to talk about, like, well, what are the pathways to parity? If we know that disparities exist and we have the resources to address them, why do we continue to see the same things happening? Even in a town like San Francisco, where less than 6% of the population is Black, but yet and still we see the numbers of folks incarcerated are still the majority. We see that 40% of the homeless population is Black. We see that the suspensions in our school districts are 30% Black. The expulsions in our school district are 30% Black. So if in a town with less than 6% and with resources, we can't make the difference or the impact, then that doesn't leave much hope for other folks. But I want to live in the space where Dr. King talked about that we can talk about and think about our finite disappointments, but we must continue to live in infinite hope. We have to continue to be hopeful. So today is not just about being hopeful, it is about how we actualize that hope. How do we move beyond the dream? How do we move beyond hope to actually implementing some of the things that we want to see happen? So I first and foremost want to thank our thought partners and partners in launching this, the folks from New School. I see you this morning, Henry Ramos from the New School. So give it up for New School, Derek Hamilton, Greed Chelwa, Henry Ramos, Fatima, Sarita, all the folks that have been partnering with us in this. And then as well, you can look through the program, you'll see all of the partners that we have coming up. So as I get ready to go through the points, and I want to thank again Henry for helping us draft those, and Dr. Sai and Brittany who've helped us in that way. I also want to bring into the room the voice of James Baldwin as we talk about some of these things. One of the things that James Baldwin said is, anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. And I think the city and county of San Francisco can bear witness to the fact that it is extremely expensive to not take care of everyone, right? To not have a pathway to parity where folks can actually be self-sufficient and have economic mobility. And so I just want us to think about as we go through this, it costs too much, or when we challenge the idea and notion of guaranteed income or a jobs guarantee or giving people what they need to be housed, that when we make those challenges, it actually costs us more money to not do some of that. So it is expensive. The other thing that he said that is the point of today is that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So today we face the fact that we have inequities, that we have disparities, and that we want to change them. And so this is the beginning of that conversation, but hopefully more than a conversation, the beginning of action and implementation. So the call to action, and that we want you all to help us do and to achieve, is that we want to create and build new opportunities for a human rights economy. What does that look like to have an economy that is based in a human rights framework? What does it look like to say that we want to make sure that everybody has what they need to live and to be seen and to function as fully human and not be treated as other? We want to elevate and think about the concepts and models of restorative economic advancement. We want to be very intentional about restorative. Think about what that word means. We want you to help us think about what does it mean to have restorative economic advancement, to have economics that are restorative and that are advancing something. What are we restoring to? And so we don't want to get caught up in the, well, you never had nothing, so we're not restoring you to nothing. Like, that's not the language, because people have had things stolen from them, their dignity, their value, which has made it hard for them. So what does it mean like for us to really think about restorative practices? And if not for me, for my ancestors, right? For the folks who had their wealth stolen. The other one is we want to examine new approaches in public and private partnerships and government. So what does that look like? We want you to help us think through that, and we hope through these conversations that some of that will happen. And then lastly, we want to support the development of a racial equity and inclusion framework for economic success that is scalable, not just for San Francisco, but that can be replicated. And that's why our partners that are here from Northeastern or from the New School or from Loyola Chicago are so important, because we want to think about what are the best practices that are happening in other places? What are the things that are happening here? What are the things that are happening with the African American redress? I see you, Billy and Linda, and the folks from Columbia and Howard. What does it look like for us to actually implement some of those things and advance them? So with that, we will begin our first conversation, and I am so elated and grateful to have the honor to engage with a few folks here this morning, but to start the conversation off first with Alicia Garza. So I'm going to invite Alicia up as I get ready. Give it up for Alicia. I want to use this conversation for Alicia to introduce herself in a new way. I think folks think they know her in the history, but I think she is doing some, and I just want to say I'm so happy for how happy the young people are to see you. So hopefully before you leave, you can get a picture with these young folks, and they can understand that, you know, they get to live in that, but they can also replicate and be their own model of greatness. But Alicia is doing some work that I think is really fundamental for the next era of this work, right? Like, how do we move forward? How do we not just live in the past of the work, but how do we move forward? And so I want Alicia to reintroduce herself, as Jay would say, to be able to have a conversation about what it is she's doing now and why she's doing that. And so as I move to my seat, I would just welcome you. Alicia, like, I don't know if folks know, Alicia is also from the Bay and has done a lot of work here, and her work through Community and Domestic Workers Alliance and the work she has done in Bayview and in San Francisco proper. I just want to, again, I'm just so grateful to have you here. Give it up again for Alicia Garza. So, good morning. So, good to see you. I wanted Alicia to start with, yes, introducing herself, but by way of the Black Futures Lab. I think, at one point in time, San Francisco, I see folks from Young Community Developers here, and President Walton and I had launched a local initiative around Black to the Future. And so we've got this synergy around like what that means. But I want you to kind of introduce yourself in that framing of the Black Futures Lab and the evolution of like why that's important.
Absolutely. Good morning. It's so good to be back in the Bay. Always good to be back in San Francisco. And this is exactly what I want to be talking about this morning. So thank you for the invitation. I'm Alicia Garza. I use she, her, hers, and diva pronouns. And I actually do use all of those pronouns. And I run an organization called the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, which works to make Black communities powerful in politics so we can be powerful in the rest of our lives. I do wear many, many hats, or used to at least. I work with the Domestic Workers Alliance, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, as the senior advisor to the president. And I also am one of the co-founders of a organization called Supermajority, which I'm wearing my pink today, which is a new home for women's activism. And I'm one of the co-creators of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, which now has 40 chapters in 4 countries and all of that. The reason that I use all of those kind of descriptors is not to kind of run down the long list of things I do in a day. But it's to say that the center of my work is trying to always figure out how we make our communities powerful. And this is a different concept, I think, than just empowerment, which is often what we talk about. When we talk about communities of color, when we talk about disadvantaged or marginalized communities, we talk about empowerment. And empowerment really means self-esteem. It means feeling good about yourself in the conditions that you're living in right now. But power is actually something very different. Power is about the ability to make the rules and change the rules. Power is about being able to decide where resources go and where they don't go. Power is about there being consequences if people disappoint you. Okay. And power is also about being able to tell the story of who we are and who we can be together. Okay. There's a very powerful story that's operating in this country right now. It's called Make America Great Again. Right? That's power. Okay. Correct. Correct. So at the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, we work to figure out how we build Black power so that we can build the kind of world, right, where we all have dignity. Okay. I also want to say that part of how we approach our work is that we have some principles about what it means to actually build real power, especially as it relates to policy. And as we're having a conversation about how we change and address disparities, we're really talking about, right, how it is that we uproot racism.
Right.
In San Francisco and California, throughout this country, right? How do we uproot racism? And as it relates to policy, there's a few approaches that we have to make sure that we're taking. One approach, right, is to make sure that we are developing and designing policy that is race forward, not race neutral. You can't address problems that you don't talk about.
Right.
You can't expect, right, that talking about things broadly is going to address very specific disparities.
Right.
How do you address the suspension rate of Black students if you're never talking about the fact that Black students are suspended at overwhelming rates? How do you address the fact that Black families are hemorrhaging out of San Francisco if we don't address that it's actually Black families that are hemorrhaging out of San Francisco faster than anywhere else in the country besides post Katrina New Orleans.
Wow.
Okay. So, policy as it relates to how we uproot systemic racism has to actually address race.
Right. Well, is
Boom.
that why, like, the work you're doing, even with the Black census, is that
Mm.
part of that? Because I think that's also a nouveau kind of like thinking to be very intentional about the data and who's collecting it.
Yep, yep, it is. So the Black Census Project is basically what we say is a model of what democracy is supposed to look like in this country. We are talking to 200,000 Black people across the nation in every community about what it is that we experience every day in the economy, in our democracy, in our society, and what we want to see done about it. We did this project in 2018. We've revived it again in 2022. And I can tell you the most common thing that people said
Mhm.
was that nobody ever asked me
Mhm.
what I want for my future. I've never
Right.
been asked that question.
Mm.
Not only is that leaving people out and leaving people behind, but it has impacts for public policy. What does that mean if the majority of people that we talked to, over 30,000 at that point, said nobody's ever engaged me
Mm. Mm.
on housing, on healthcare, on the economy? That means that we're being left out of public policy,
Yeah.
right? And then that means, right, um, also that we're not having our needs addressed
Exactly.
and we're not having our concerns addressed. The other thing that is important about the Black Census Project is that it's not just a bunch of data. This data goes to grassroots organizations across the country to help bolster their organizing efforts around issues that are impacting our communities, from housing to healthcare to education to criminal legal system reform. And it also is used to design a legislative agenda that we organize communities around that
Mm.
are addressing some of the biggest problems facing us. You can see our first version of that on our website at black2, the number two, thefuture.org, where we actually created a Black agenda from the Black census. And we used it as an organizing tool leading up to the 2020 elections, taking our perceptions of voting and engagement from people to policy, from personality to policy.
Mm.
Lots of us are making decisions about who represents us based on if we feel good about them or not, we like them or not. Are they nice?
Well, it's hard in San Francisco because I feel like even though it's big, but the Black population is so small that everybody seems to know each other. And a lot of this is very much personality driven.
It
It's
is.
about like, oh, I saw her at dinner the other night. Like,
Right. But it also needs to be based on what are they doing
hmm,
about the issues that we care about.
yeah.
Are we on the same page about how to address some of these problems? Right? Do you know, right? How to do you have the relationships to have the conversations and the negotiations that are happening
Yeah,
and actually make those productive? And in whose interests are you negotiating?
exactly.
Right? Are you negotiating on behalf of community, or are you negotiating on behalf of other entities that don't have community as their priority
Yeah.
or as their interests? The last thing I want to say about the Black Census Project, and if you haven't taken it, you should take it because it's open right now and it literally takes 5 minutes. It's blackcensus.org. Is that we don't just extract information, we bring it back to the
Right.
communities we gathered it in.
Hmm.
So we're getting ready to do our Black Census Roadshow, where we'll be going back to all the towns and cities that we talked to and presenting what you said about what you care about and what you want to see for your future. And we do that with media partners, we do it with local elected officials, right? And we actually help to facilitate conversations about what do we do next.
Mm.
The reason that we say that this is one of the best models of democracy is because it is a massive listening and engagement project that is attempting to help bring people together to fight for the things that we want and need.
So with that, before we get ready to bring up some other folks to join in the conversation, as you collect that data and that information, we've been very fortunate. Mayor Breed has allocated the $60 million a year, along with Supervisor President Walton, for the Dreamkeeper Initiative. And as we collect data and as we gather it, we've realized that there's this need to do this corrective narrative storytelling.
Yes.
And how do we take that data and tell a story that doesn't further, because I really wrestle with saying 30% of the suspensions are Black students, because then people use that to justify suspending Black students, or if you talk about the incarceration. So how do you use the data to really tell a story that's not deficit based and puts the burden on the people, but really shifts the burden and the blame to the
Yeah.
system?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to name who's doing what.
Mm.
Black students are being suspended, but the school district is suspending Black students at astronomical rates. Okay.
Mhm.
Sometimes we talk about poverty in the same way, right? And we do it from a perspective of people's choices as opposed to a perspective of public policy.
Mm.
Okay. So the stories that we tell actually have to highlight who's responsible and what the impact is rather than who's surviving
Right.
the consequences of decades of bad policy.
Mhm. I will clap for that, because everybody's sitting, and like that's one of the things that I really hope people will like make a note of. Like when we talk and the language that we use, to be really mindful, to have the shift around like what the system is doing, what the policies are doing. And that's a lot of what we're finding with the
Yep.
Dreamkeeper Initiative is like, look, why do we do it this way? Like, why can't we, like, if somebody needs a job and they need money in the in-between time while the job gets up and running, why can't we just meet that need?
That's right. That's right.
So I just want to just celebrate and again recognize and acknowledge. Also, I want to shout out to Orlando White, LinkedIn, for hosting us today. Thank you. I want to, as we were thinking about like who to engage in this conversation, I wanted to invite up some folks who have this experience for what you're talking about, like that gathering information, lived experience. So LaJaya Smith, if you want to come on up, give LaJaya a hand. And LaJaya is an alum of Life Learning Academy, if y'all didn't know. And then I wanted to invite up the queen, I think, Sophie Maxwell, former supervisor and trendsetter and amazing model for how to advance this work. And then Jerry Johnson, who grew up here in the city, who I made move his name tag, and now he's got it on his thigh. I think I wanted to, as we get ready to move into this conversation, I wanted to start with um, with um, Alicia and Supervisor Maxwell, actually around. You grab that one too for me. Around what do we, as we wrestle with this, is there anything from the past that we should be taking into the future? Is it our history, the elders, the culture? Like, what does it look like to be intentional about moving forward, but also not erasing the past? Because I know similarly, when we did some of this work in San Francisco, we heard from Black folks in the city, they felt invisible or they felt erased. And I want to make sure that we don't further erase as we move into the future. So there's, what can we take, or what do you see as the thing to take into the future?
Well, I would say, unfortunately, not a lot has changed.
Hmm.
So the future and the past kind of all revolve around each other. But I think what we have to do is understand the lens in which we're looking at. And we have to rethink wealth. A lot of us, we are wealthy. But if we base it on what other people have, we will never get there. We have to base our wealth on our strengths and what we have. Money is extremely important. I mean, just let me say, money is extremely important, but it's not everything. Creativity that we have, we are used every day for our creativity. We bring wealth. Slavery has changed. because we still bring wealth to this country.
Wow.
We are wealth building people, but usually it's somebody else's wealth.
Mm.
But we have to garner that and understand what that is and redefine. Because if we redefine it, then they no longer have the strings. So we have to rethink. We also have to consider the environment. If we're going to be wealthy, let's consider how we're going to build our wealth. It cannot be the same way. It's not sustainable. We look at Jackson, Mississippi. Who gets hurt? Look at Florida. Look at Puerto Rico. Who gets hurt from this climate and this environment? So we have to rethink wealth and how we build it and what it looks like, and understand we're not coming from nowhere. We have a base of wealth. Let's build on that.
Thank you.
I think the thing that we can bring from the past to the present and into the future is a focus on building political power. It is incredible that this city has a mayor who's not only born and raised here, right, but is willing to think outside the box as it relates to how to address some of the most pervasive, enduring problems in the city. Now, with that being said, she needs to be pressured. She needs to be held to account. And when I say that, I don't mean we need to beat up on her.
Right.
That's my sister. She's good people. But what I'm saying is, right, that one of the things that we can bring from the past is the spirit of make me do it. It's the spirit of make me do it. And the way we make people do things is by being relentless with our participation, and being clear in our vision and being specific. The Dream Keepers initiative is a result, right, of movement.
Right.
A decade, right, of organizing worldwide around Black lives creates the space for innovation and courage to do things differently. 10 years ago, right, we actually weren't able to have these conversations out loud,
Right.
in the ways that we are right now. What are we doing with this moment? So it's como es, it's a make me do it spirit. And the other thing that I think comes forward in this is relentless participation.
Yes.
Relentless participation. We always talk in terms of our forebears, we talk about all the struggles and hardships that people endured. And people weren't enduring hardships, walking miles, being hosed, chased by dogs, beaten by police because people were trying to be martyrs. No, people were trying to get free. And so they understood that their participation mattered, no matter what. You're seeing it now in places like Georgia, 11-hour lines to vote. It's not to vote, it's because people want to exercise their power, right? So that's something I think we can take from the past and bring forward.
Thank you. I want to, I know we're supposed to move on, but I want to ask Jerry and Lejeya the same kind of thoughts. Or is there anything that you're thinking about that you want to bring from the past in the future, or are you starting all over?
No, I would bring hustle and motivation from the past into the future, because all that our backbones was built on from slavery, from even I have a single mother who raised 3 kids, so I watched her motivation and hustle to raise all of us, raise us as good as she can, and she did a beautiful job.
Right.
So. And also as a businesswoman for myself, having my own business, I have those days where I just want to give up on everything because it's not going as well as I want to. I'm not making the money that I want to, but I know that in life there's trials and tribulations. So if I want to succeed in life, I got to keep on going, keep on moving forward and maintain my goals.
All right. Thank you. I know Jerry be hustling. So
Yeah. One thing I try to channel, and I'll start by saying, I ain't built like our ancestors were, like they were strong. But what I do try to channel is that like resiliency and by any means necessary attitude. So, and you see it championed in certain people today. I mean, but if you look back, like Harriet Tubman said, it wasn't enough to get free. Like, let me go back an additional 19 times, to the countless people who like figured out how to read when it was against the law. Like I don't know if I was that strong, but I try to channel it as much as I can today, and you'll see it with people like LeBron James. It's not good enough to be an amazing athlete. Let me start an academy to help with the kids who come from where I come from. Let me hire my friends and do that work. And we see it in the local politics and within San Francisco. I don't think me or Lejay or many of the youth would be in here if it wasn't for people like Director Davis after the gentlemen were killed in 2015 in that car and said, let's start a program where they can work during the summer, be able to climb the economic mobility ladder. And then that obviously went on and transformed into what we see today as opportunities for all, and just trying to carry that as I go on with my work. It's not just enough to build a project or real estate development in a low income neighborhood. How many contractors can we bring on? Can we make sure that partners are, people who represent that community, so on and so forth. So that resiliency and by any means necessary attitude being channeled is what I try to focus on and bring forward.
I'm gonna. I hope you all will give me license because I'm gonna deviate a little bit, just big piggybacking or veggie backing or following up on what Supervisor Maxwell said around wealth, because I'm listening to each of you talk about your strategies for moving forward or the ways that we do that. And far too often, to the point around wealth, it's defined with this other lens, right? And that the wealth that you all have just described up here, like how do we think about economic success, right, in that space of cultural wealth, right? Because hustle and motivation and resilience may not be something they teach you in school, and it may not be something that is on a resume, but it is extremely important for the success and actually for the existence of folks, right? Especially for folks of color, specifically in my experience for Black folks, right? So being able to like withstand like the insanity of people saying stuff to you that you like, what? Why are you talking to me like that, right? But that you've been prepared for it, right? That you have this idea to be able to move through it or understand and see the bigger picture. So what does economic success look like, or even like how are we defining, or how can we redefine wealth, right? In the way that you've called out Supervisor Maxwell, or in the way that you've talked about Lejaya, and that you are actually modeling, Alicia, like how do we get the policymakers, the systems leaders to rethink cultural wealth, or how we define it?
Well, I think when you consider that people would say owning a home is one way to have wealth, how many people are going to be able to own a home? Homes are going to be redefined. There already are. There's no one little house somewhere that you can own. You're owning, it's different. So we're going to have to rethink again how and what that means and what success is. You have to define success. When I was growing up, way back in the 60s and 70s, Black was not beautiful. We changed that. We said, wait a minute, Black is beautiful. And these lips, these full lips are like pillows when you kiss. And this hair, this hair protects me from the sun and protects me from the rain. Black is beautiful. We redefined beauty. And we redefined beauty in women and men. We redefined it. And so you cannot get caught up in their definition of anything because you will never work. You will never fall into it. And so when we talk about wealth, when we talk about those, really go deep inside of you and think, what is wealth? And when you think of what kind of job, I used to tell my grandson, he said, well, what am I going to do? I said, what do people need? And what are your gifts? It's not just about your passion. My family has always been in the people business. And and working. My mother, there's a school named after her in San Francisco. I never knew hunger. We have houses. My grandmother, we have stuff. So it's not that you're not going to have anything if you think about the whole, if you think about what people need, that's your wealth. That is how you gain it. That's how you do it. You have to rethink. And the politics, we are all the politics. It's not them and those people. People used to say, to call me a politician. I said, I am a public servant. And I reminded myself of that every day. And I reminded people, those people are public servants. And as she mentioned, you have to be involved. If you're not involved, it's your fault. Democracy is a participatory form of government. If you don't participate, somebody else will. And if you're not at the table, as they say, then you're on the menu. So those are things, you have the power within you. You are given everything you need to be successful. You have it within and you have it outside of you. The goods, the bads, the ups and downs. Start thinking about it. Get busy. This is your government. If you want to change it, think about it. It is not rocket science. None of this is. If it was, these people wouldn't be able to do it. So you know that if there are any, my mother used to say, if there are any superior people on the face of this earth, if there are any, you are part of that group. And that's how that goes.
Well, there's multiple different definitions of wealth and success. So to me, I would think wealth is knowing about money and how to use money. So knowing the value of money, because money makes the world go round. So knowing what to do with the money, how to use it, how to save it. Because the rich stay rich because they're saving their money. They're not blowing off a bag. I mean, they are, but they're not blowing it off on just anything. They're using that money to invest. They're using that money to do real estate and home ownerships so they can keep the money going for generations to come.
Well, in that same spirit, Jerry, I thought it was interesting when you started like investing and playing around and tinkering. Like, what made you want to play around and try the investment game?
Well, I started when I was younger, maybe not young for some, but 18, 19 years old. And I grew up in affordable housing, switched schools a lot. And I was like, well, if I lose this money, I can't get any closer to rock bottom. I'm very risk adverse now. So let me make as many mistakes with these couple of dollars before I get older and make mistakes with something that may cause my kid not be able to go to the college they want to, so on and so forth. And I think that everyone makes those mistakes growing up. But I think the biggest factor when looking at economic success is that some people grow up and are cultivated in a household to where their parents can be the safety net or their support system can be the safety net for them to make those mistakes in a comfortable place. Whereas others are thrown into the world and their first mistakes are magnified because they are adults. The only source of income they have is their income. So yeah, I think that's what got me to do it younger.
Cool. Jerry. Alicia, as I wanted to ask this to Jerry and Lajea, but I'll ask you, based on what you've seen from the work with Black Census and Black to the Future Labs, what do we need to be doing to support the next generation for economic mobility? Like, what can we do to begin to try to embed in our systems and policies?
Well, the first thing I think we can be doing is getting clear on what it is that we want to change and how we think that change happens. I feel pretty strongly that we need to demand more of each other and our government. And I do think it's a problem that you cannot fathom buying a home in San Francisco. And I think that is something that we have to address directly and not concede that it's just not possible And so we should move on to a different thing, right? Um, I think we have to demand more from government. I moved out of California 6 months ago.
Mm,
It's my home. I love it here. And trust me, it was hard.
yeah.
But I did not want to keep paying thousands of dollars in rent
Mm,
every month,
yeah.
even though I'm employed, I have a
Right.
good job. You know what I mean? I have degrees. And I'm like, this is a lot. So imagine, right? For somebody who's making less than me,
Mm,
right? How are you holding on in the Bay?
yeah.
I moved to another state so that I could buy a home. Now, with that being said, that's not a mecca,
Right.
right? Because the reason I can buy a home there is because the tax structure is different. And in fact, right? It's like everything's more affordable. Sure, because there's barely any taxes.
Right.
And that means there's barely infrastructure, right? And so that means, right? And I was talking to my sister, Latasha Brown, who runs Black Voters Matter. And she said, in our movement here, we we have a hard time thinking about holding government accountable because government doesn't serve us. So we go to hold corporations accountable. And I said, "But sis, but that's your government.
Right.
That's your government." So if we're always kind of looking at um, solving problems in a way that kind of concedes that somebody else is always going to have power, right? Then it kind of um, lets people off the hook for the things that they're supposed to be doing to be our servants. So I think as it relates to how we're training a future generation to think about how we make change, I think it's actually about placing front and center, well, who do we think is responsible and accountable for these decisions? Yes, it's us,
Mhm.
right? But there are actually mechanisms that make it so that people can't buy homes in the city. There are mechanisms,
Mm,
right, that make it so that schools can dump Black kids and brown kids, while other schools, right, are developing the next president and vice president of the United States. That's designed,
mm,
and we can undesign it, but we have to commit to um, accountability,
mm.
and we have to commit to, I think, um, remembering, right, who does work for us and actually making them work for us.
All right. I, Jerry and Lejea, like what do you see? Because what I'm hearing is that we need to redefine wealth. We need to define our own success. We need to continue to challenge authority. There's a line that James Baldwin has, I'm going to mess it up, but that says, there is no more dangerous creation than someone who has nothing to lose. And so I always took that as we need to be a threat, right? To move from being the victim to being a threat, not a threat physically to someone, but to have them be like, "Ooh, they know this game, like they're on to me," and that they're going to use their intellect to like flip this. And if they flip this, it's not going to like play out the same way anymore. And so I think part of what I'm hearing you say, Alicia, is like we have to continue to challenge the system, and the system needs to not just be like, oh, they have accepted this as the game, right? And they're looking to be first in line versus changing the game. And I think part of that is how do we redefine wealth, as Supervisor Maxwell said, and like also at the same time to say like, don't erase me from the opportunity to like to own a home, because I know Jerry, like that's something that you've been working to do, right?
Correct.
And like what was the motivating factor for you? Like did you can't buy in San Francisco, so what do you decide? You know, like where do you go? How do you as a young person who still has way more time of you ahead of you than I do, like how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, and I think you negotiate it two ways, right? Because it is very hard to do something like owning a home in San Francisco, and there are programs that can support that for someone who are of the economic status or whatever it is that I am, but then you have to weigh those odds, right? Because like you were saying, it's not just enough to be a part of the institution and take what it is, but be able to flip it on its head. So I hit like a crossroads end of last year where it was use what's available in San Francisco to own a home, because I believe Dream Keepers is helping as well with the DOUBT program. So there's something in between $300,000 and $500,000 you can get to support you for a down payment on a home in San Francisco, which makes it financially feasible. But then I thought, how would that affect me? Am I looking to just say I own in San Francisco, or am I looking to reap the benefits of actually owning in San Francisco? And then when you read below the line and you look at those loans, you realize that you don't have the ability to move to New York for 2 years and rent your apartment out, right? You don't have the ability to sell it for the same value and get the equity out of it. So it's like this pseudo sense of ownership, right? And then I think with that, I said, well, let me, utilize delayed gratification, purchase a place that I may be able to have multiple streams of income and rent from, which I did. And eventually, if I want to come back, have that opportunity by my own means. But again, it's a big step forward that there is this help out there to receive those down payments and those loans. But now let's look at it through a lens of how can we make that more efficient and better, right? Because you don't want to be slave to your own house in which the city actually owns.
And I think that's what we're talking about in terms of like, how do you define wealth? Because for you, it was like just owning a home is not wealth, right? Because in San Francisco, you own it on paper, but if you want to sell it, you can't make a profit off of it, right? If you go through some of those programs, and the ability to do the research to understand that and challenge that norm. But Lajaya, you're on the younger end of the spectrum and like doing your entrepreneurial work and trying to get that off the ground. Like where are you in this, like how we define success, or what it is that you need even personally to have economic mobility?
I find this question perfect because as the chair of the My Brothers Sisters Keeper San Francisco Youth Council, we decided to come up with a series of workshops for the Black and Brown high schoolers that is surrounded by wealth building. So we're giving them the tools and information on taxes, home ownership, stocks, investing, and even the history of economic oppression, which was facilitated by a very young Dr. Sai.
Oh,
So shout out to you. Thank you so much. So I believe all this information is important because we're not taught financial literacy in schools. So believe if everybody was taught this in high school now, we will all be up in the game. We will all be homeowners. We'll be knowing how to do our own taxes. We know how to do stocks. We know how to do all that. So this is what we need to be in schools. And the hope is that through our fellowship, that it sparks inspiration for success in the future to come.
all right. In a second, I just want to see if there's one or two questions from the audience, but I did just want to, we've talked about economic success. I guess my question to pose to whoever wants to respond is, how do we build economic power? Right, like the power of economics, because you talked about in some places it's the government, in some places it's corporations. A lot of folks have been looking to philanthropy to fix what's wrong in spaces. How do we actually like build economic power when some of the folks who are Black or brown or minorities or female don't have access to the money to actually flip it on its head the way it needs to be?
I guess I'll start with that and say, in San Francisco, there's no perfect or ideal government, but I don't think there's too many more cities where the economic resources are as plentiful. With that being said, there still are issues, but the way I see it being done are through institutional agents within those, because things are forever shifting. Everyone's problems are always going to be highly variable and individualized because people were subject to years, if not generations, of neglect, health wise, financially, educationally. So everyone is going to have these problems. And I think it takes these institutional agents to always question, right? Like San Francisco has a great fellowship program, but if it wasn't for Dr. Sai and other people at Hope SF saying, well, there aren't that many people that look like me in there that I think deserve this job, right? And burning that midnight oil to create these programs to give people like me and my other potential fellows opportunities, we may not be where we're at. So I think it's these institutional agents within these economies and infrastructure that can support development, burning the midnight oil and being highly adjustable to the problems that people have, because it's never going to be predictable.
I do just want to acknowledge, and I think, it would be interesting, Supervisor Maxwell, because Jerry's talking about his experience in institutional agents. And I just want to own also that institutional agents have to be able to like work with a variety of experiences, skill sets, and behaviors, right? Because it's really easy to be like, they're not ready and push somebody out and they never are ready, right? And so not to say that Jerry was challenging, but that there were probably some moments when Dr. Sai was like, this boy does not want to work, right? But that, like, what does that evolution look like? Because we don't want to, somebody was saying earlier, like, keep it real. Like, we don't want to keep it real sometimes, right? And we don't want to have the honest conversation about, like, it's hard because maybe it's hard because we're trying to make people fit into the mold of what we think it's supposed to be, and not leveraging, as Supervisor Maxwell said, their wealth and their experience. But it also is like, we have to set you up for, you're going to work with me for now, but sooner or later you have to go somewhere else where that's the expectation, right? And so what does it look like for us to actually support or develop institutional agents? Sister, I'm so church mode right now, like, amen. Um, but Supervisor Maxwell, like this piece around like how we are investing in our institutional agents, or how I know the work of your mother and NABE House and other folks around, like really building a community of folks to support people to be able to move to the next level.
I think it's been mentioned, and starting in high school, I think that's the program. When she talks about education and educating people, that's the program. And when you talk about changing, you have to change these institutions. You have to change those people. You have to say, wait a minute, this is not the real world. No, this does not work for us. I mean, there were a long time ago, there used to be protests where people would protest outside of the bank. They would protest these institutions, bring awareness to what's going on. And most people would agree with you, white, black, blue, or green, that these institutions are not doing. Wells Fargo should be in prison. The whole bank should be in jail. I mean, look what they have done. And most people would agree with you if somebody would bring it to our attention. These institutions are not helping the majority of people. And so if somebody were to say, hey, look, everybody, these agents are not really being agents for us. They're not agents of change. And I think most people in this country are in the same plight. And if African Americans and Black people, because now, I mean, we have to look globally at Black. We have to look globally at people. This is a global world. That's right. And if we do that, Google, all these people are in Africa. And why? Because they're with these young people. One of the youngest countries in the world is Africa. And these people are creative and they're doing things. So we have to look globally and think in a different way. I mean, coin bits or bitcoins, whatever that stuff is, they put out there to kind of get you going on something. It's money. The real thing is money. And we have to remember these agents, who are they working for? And if they're working, we will never fit into that. So you have to rethink how you buy. Do you buy with groups? Do you buy with people? Right on 3rd Street, right down the street from me, you go to see some apartment, but for sale, apartments, I would say, but condos for sale. 1.3 they start at. They start at 1.3, and the association dues are over $1,000 a month. Who in the world? So you have to think, how do I buy? Do I buy one person, just a little family? People aren't buying that way. They're buying these $3 million homes, but they're buying them with groups, with their parents, with other people, and their people are breaking them up now into 3 units, 1 house. So, I mean, we have to rethink how we go about doing this, and we have to rethink these so-called agents and how they work for us and who works for us, because banks aren't catering to you anymore. They could care less. You're doing all the work and they're charging you more fees than ever. They're not catering to you. And remember, may I just remember, we cannot, artificial intelligence, there is no such thing. That is a tool. And that tool, you don't even, when you go to put in an application, the computer reads it first.
Mm.
And if you don't say the right things, you don't get the job. So we have got to recognize and put that into our equation. This so-called, and it's a tool, this tool, like I said, we do more of the work, we do more of our banking, more fees. You almost carry your own luggage and you still have to pay for everything. You know, everything we are doing, more of the work is being shifted on us.
Mm.
And less is being, you go to a hotel and you miss your toothbrush, a computer, R2D2 will come to your knock on the door and say, open this, press this button, and your toothpaste or whatever it is you need will be there.
Mm.
Okay, and what's so good about it, the hotel workers know that and they put that in their contract. But we've got to understand, you have to really rethink the tools. We have to look at this so-called tool, because that thing is really, really making a difference in the workforce, place, and everything else we do.
It's good. So I wanted to see before we wrap up this panel, if there was 1 or 2, we'll see. Ooh, that hand went straight up. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna sit down. Hi, my name is Imani, and my question is, it's an observation and a question. One thing I have observed working in city government is that there are now a lot of people of color, and particularly Black people, in leadership positions. Um, but we still find ourselves operating within white systemic, you know, white systems, right? We don't know how to break out of that. And so my question is, what suggestions do you have in terms of changing how these systems operate? Like, what is the, like, not what is the point, but often I find ourselves, we try to get ourselves in the system because that's what they tell us. You get in the system to break it apart, but we still find ourselves operating within white power structures in the exact same format, and a lot of times it's hard to get things accomplished. So what suggestions, if any, do you have in terms of really breaking down those power structures to make them more efficient? Thank you.
Yeah.
I kind of want to pass it to the supervisor in government.
Well, I think I'm on the PUC commission, which is the Public Utilities Commission, and we deal with water, sewer, and power. And it definitely is everything you just mentioned. And I think the most important thing that you can do is you have to, first of all, do your job and know it, and know where, know the structure. And that helps, because if you do your job and you know your structure, if somebody says something to you that's off the wall, well, you definitely have a place to go and you can go to the next level. And you have to remember that it's important to, if somebody does say something that is not right or does not work within the structure, you have to say something about it, because if not, it will land on you. And so it's important to know the job, know the people, know the structure, know who who's next in line, and understand that, because there are things that you can do, places you can go, but so often, and also you need to have a buddy, because just recently there was an incident that happened in the PUC and we had to pay someone, but these people were calling this young woman, she was African American, names and being real rude, horrible to her. And she went to the next level, but they didn't do anything about it, which is, the HRC. They didn't do anything about it. But she had a friend, another African American in her group, and said, "No, wait a minute, this is not right." And they went together, and that changed. And so she, she sued and she won, because we realized we couldn't. If we went to court, PUC would have lost. So it's good to have somebody that you tell it to, that you talk it to, and that you go through the line.
I'm really glad that you raised this point, because we are certainly in an era where we are celebrating, rightfully so, the symbolism of how many more of us are in positions to make decisions. And some of us are still feeling frustrated about what feels like a lack of forward motion. And what I attribute that to, actually, is that clearly representation is not enough. We have to have people who look like us, who share our agenda,
Right.
right? It's not enough for us to have a bunch of Clarence Thomases.
All right. All right.
It's not sufficient, right? So this piece that I keep saying about us pushing each other to be rigorous about what we expect from each other, what we expect from our government, right, is important in that context. And with that being said, we also, and this is work that we do at the Black Futures Lab and the Action Fund, we have to train our folks how to be rule makers. Right? It's not enough to just be in the position of power if you don't know what to do with it.
That's right.
And it's like a little known secret, I think, that we put people in positions to make decisions, but they're not trained to do it.
Yeah.
They're learning
Yeah.
at the same time. So we run an institute called the Black to the Future Public Policy Institute. And we train people in our communities how to write new rules and how to get those rules passed in state legislatures and city councils, right? And then how to implement those rules, because that's also a big barrier, right? Sometimes we pass the policy, but it's more symbolic than anything else, because nobody can figure out how to move the money
Right.
to get the thing done. So it's really about, I think, democratizing the tools of government too. Okay, so that we're not always like, those people aren't doing anything for us. It's like we can do a lot for ourselves, but we have to be not only willing to get into that battlefield, but we have to have the right tools.
And if I can, before I close, sorry, we're gonna close out this panel. We're already a little over, but if I can, before I ask everyone to say the one thing, because my girl Stephanie back there is my friend, my colleague. I don't want to say my girl, people might be like offended. Everything gotta be all PC and stuff. If she's taking notes, so I'm gonna ask you on your final thing, like what's the one thing, the bit of advice that if we're building a human rights economy that we need to make sure is embedded in there, if that framework is happening. And I just want to say, with regards to the fight the power, the white structures, the systems, the question is, for some folks, it is the job, right? And like, give people that grace to be like, I'm not here to do anything other than get my check. Right. Like, and I think that's the hard part that we've got to negotiate and navigate. And, I've had this conversation with my colleagues at work where I'm like, there are some things that I'm definitely going to be like, Madam Mayor, I don't agree. I think we should do it this way. And there's some things I'm going to be like, I'm not ready to lose my job for that. Yeah. Right. And that we have to just kind of like, some things I'm like all day long, like I cannot go back into community and be like, I co-signed that. Right. But that there are some things that I'm like, the old school like battle or the war, do you want to win the battle or do you want to win the war? Sometimes I'm like, I can lose that battle, right? Because that one I'm not going to lose sleep over. But some of this other stuff, like I do not want to have to And that's where I think the participation, the community, the larger piece, because if it's something that's really important to folks, what's the community? Because if those folks are not connected to community, they don't care. And so if we don't have those relationships, they may not even realize that the system is oppressive and that it's hurting other folks, right? And then they may realize it and be like, well, it ain't hurting me, right? So we just also have to own and accept the degrees of who folks are and decide where we want to add pressure, because sometimes we can add that pressure and make the change. And sometimes it's just like, you'd be surprised. Sometimes your allies are not Black folks. So I'm sorry, we're like 5 minutes over. Look, you go hijack my panel. I'm trying to like close it. Can you ask afterwards, Siri? I mean, I said 1 or 2 depending on time. So let me just tell you this, like I am the one that will be like, that's just not right. Right, I said 1 or 2, but these folks will be here after. I just want. We have to have a family, we have to support families. I understand that.
The war happened, Africans came here. I saw it, I was here. They bought homes, and then the homes now are not.
Thank you. So
my question is, how do we support the families, young families? The family has changed. The unit of family, the makeup has changed the way it looks. How do we support families, parents with children, so they can buy a home and they can also prosper and make this all dream come happen?
Thank you for asking the question. Unfortunately, I don't have the time for you all to be able to answer it. So I would ask that if you would share that with us later. I'm going to just be honest and transparent with you all. Like I really, really struggle with like how we show up in spaces. And I do want to make sure that everybody has voice and has the opportunity to speak. But it's really challenging, right? Because I don't want to disrespect him, but I also, like I'm gonna tell you, I don't want to be disrespected. And so how do we, like, this is the thing that I'm saying, like, as we do these spaces and places, like, I'm not a politician, right? Like, and that's why I pay so much respect to folks like Supervisor Maxwell and even to Alicia Garza, because it takes a lot to put yourself out there to people and know that people are not gonna like what you say or do and react to that. And I'm not good with that, right? Like I am like, you know, I have to catch myself because I'm like, I'm not like, I'm on a panel right now, right? But in community, like it would be very different exchange and all of that. So I just wanted like, I want to say like, how do we grow and do, and like, I just want to respect the folks that hold that space, right? Because like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, I just want to, you know, I'm just really like, y'all, I have to pray. Sarah. So I don't know, but we go. So if we could just, what's the thing to add? I know I make it worse. I'm sorry, but let Supervisor Maxwell. What's the one thing we want to add to the panel, to the framework?
Actually, I think I've really said it, and that is that.
Oh, Sarah, tell her to come back in.
That you have within yourself, and you have to think about the whole, and that means it's not just about wealth or that kind of wealth, but what wealth really is, and that who you really are within that, and what's important to the whole, not just your neighbors, but the whole. You've got to think about everything because it all comes back, it all comes around. This environment, this is one system. And you're living in a system. So how do you live in that system? Your body is one system, so is the earth. And you have to remember the earth in what you do. You have to think about the environment. And it's not just some white thing or somewhere, it's real because it affects women and people of color more than anyone else. How do you do your business? How are you going to be about building your wealth? Is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to be about the whole and all of us? And I look forward to all of you and your wealth. And also think about this artificial intelligence. This is a real thing that you've got to consider in everything that you do because it's making decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think to close out and add on to that, my thought was sparked by the young woman's question over there about representation and help. But I think when building a panel, Blackness has always been something that's been fetishized, but I think it's not enough to represent and champion Black people without representing the plight of the Black person. So it's not enough to just focus on making sure that Black people are represented physically and that the face of it's Black, but that the supporting system is reflecting the plight of the people who that it represents. So focusing on both together.
One last advice I would give is to basically be a rebel and challenge authority. Now, when I say that, you gotta do it respectfully though, because you can't win every battle, but you gotta know when to step up. If you feel in your heart that something is unjust, speak up to it and let it be known.
I don't know that I have any advice. Maybe a call to action, which is let's build an agenda together and fight for it together.
Thank you.